All right, welcome everyone to today's deep dive. We're going to be looking at some pretty interesting claims that challenge conventional historical narratives.
Yeah,
The
yeah,
kind of stuff that makes you go, hmm.
absolutely.
So we've got a couple of sources for this one.
Okay.
We've got excerpts from a document titled All Notes 01012025.
Mm.
And then we've also got a transcript from a YouTube series called My Lunch Break.
Interesting.
Now, the All Notes document seems to be jam-packed with analysis.
Right.
And the creator of that YouTube series, well, he seems to be asking some really interesting questions about history.
Yeah, what kind of jumps out at you from these sources? What are they getting at?
Well, it seems like both of them are kind of hinting at the idea that, the standard timeline of historical events
Yeah.
might not be
No.
entirely accurate.
Incomplete, maybe?
Yeah, incomplete. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Like there are pieces missing from the puzzle.
It's like we're looking at a picture with chunks of it missing,
Yeah.
right?
Exactly. Okay, so the All Notes document uses this Gonzales County courthouse in Texas as a case study.
Okay.
And the traditional narrative is that this courthouse was built in like 2 years
Wow.
after a fire destroyed the previous one.
2 years, that seems pretty fast.
Yeah, so the AI analysis presented in these notes estimates that a project of that scale back then would realistically take more like 4.5 to 7.5 years to complete.
So more than double, maybe even triple the time.
Yeah. And this is back in 1895.
1895. Wow. Think about all the logistics involved in a project like that back then.
Right.
When you're talking about transporting millions of bricks,
Really?
100,000 cubic feet of limestone, and that's not even including the wood, steel, glass, all the other materials needed for a building of that size.
I mean, where are the hundreds of horses and wagons needed to haul all that stuff?
Right, exactly.
Not to mention the skilled workers you'd need,
Oh, yeah.
like bricklayers, carpenters, masons.
Hundreds of them. Skilled labor wasn't easy to come by back then.
And you know what's crazy? The official narrative barely mentions any of that.
Is that right?
Yeah, it's like it only mentions a quarry owner overseeing the whole thing.
So basically, they're saying this one guy just managed this massive project with, what, a handful of workers?
Pretty much. It doesn't really add up.
No, it doesn't. I mean, where did all the workers live? Were there temporary housing structures built nearby? What about food for all those people for potentially 7.5 years?
Yeah.
And let's not forget about the horses.
Oh, the horses.
Hundreds of gallons of water per day per horse.
Were they trucking in water for all those horses every day for 7 years?
Yeah, where's the river? Where's the water source? And even more, where's all the documentation for the planning and permitting process? Even back then, a project of this magnitude has got to have months, if not years of planning, right? Approvals, blueprints.
Exactly. You'd think there would be some kind of record of that.
Right, and yet nothing. It's like they conveniently skipped over those crucial details.
Totally. It's like they're trying to cram this complex, multi-year project into like this neat little 2-year box.
Right, and hoping nobody will notice.
It definitely makes you wonder, doesn't it?
It does.
It definitely raises some eyebrows.
So, if the Gonzales County Courthouse timeline is potentially off, what else might be out there?
Well, that's where this YouTube transcript gets really interesting because it takes a much broader view and starts questioning the whole idea of, this gradual technological advancement throughout history.
I see.
Yeah, it's like it focuses on this explosion of inventions in the 1800s.
Okay.
The telephone, the light bulb, the car, the airplane,
Yeah.
all within like a few decades.
Right.
It's like, was human ingenuity just like dormant for centuries and then suddenly went, boom?
Like someone flipped a switch.
Exactly. It's kind of like going from no internet to smartphones overnight.
Now that you mention it, it does seem like an incredible leap forward in such a short period of time. What's the transcript's take on all that?
Well, it basically argues that this rapid advancement is, well, highly improbable and, get this, proposes that maybe these weren't new inventions at all.
Go on.
But maybe reintroductions of technology.
Reintroduction.
From a previous...
It's rediscoveries.
Yeah, for a previous, maybe more advanced civilization.
Oh. Okay, now that's interesting. So are they suggesting that we're not as advanced as we think we are? That we're just catching up to what's already been done?
It's a pretty wild idea, right? And that this actually ties back to those impressive buildings we were just talking about, like the courthouse. The transcript actually suggests that many of those ornate structures, courthouses, cathedrals, even something like St. Mark's Basilica in Venice,
Wow.
might actually be repurposed structures from this previous civilization.
Repurposed.
Yeah.
So they're saying that these grand buildings, the ones that we marvel at today, might not have been built from scratch.
Exactly. The transcript points out that the official narratives often talk about these buildings being built with incredible speed, sometimes in a year or less.
Really? A year?
But as we saw with that courthouse example, it just doesn't really make sense when you consider, the logistics involved.
No, it doesn't. Especially when you factor in the lack of information about the workforce.
Right. Like, who were these master craftsmen who could erect these massive structures in such a short time?
Exactly. Where are the records of their existence? Where are the guilds, the apprenticeships, the training manuals?
Like they just, poof, appeared out of nowhere, built these incredible buildings, and then vanished.
Yeah, almost like magic.
And, another thing the transcript points out is this whole fire narrative.
What about it?
It seems like every time there's a question about the origins of a building, there's this convenient fire that destroys all the evidence.
Oh, so it's like a convenient way to erase any evidence that might contradict the official story.
Yeah, exactly.
That's quite a coincidence.
Right, like how convenient is that? But there's this other point made in the transcript that I found really intriguing.
Okay, I'm all ears.
It's about the word founded.
Founded? What about it?
It seems like such a small detail, but the transcript argues that the word founded, as in this institution was founded in, implies discovery rather than creation.
So like they're saying that they stumbled upon this incredible structure and just decided to claim it as their own.
Exactly. Like they're saying, hey, look what we found, not look what we built.
That's a really interesting point.
And to be honest, it actually kind of makes that technology release theory seem a bit more believable.
Right, because if we entertain the idea that there's, maybe like a group out there that's strategically reintroducing old technology, it would explain this rapid advancement we see in the 1800s.
Yeah, like they're holding back the good stuff and then just releasing it bit by bit over time.
It's a wild theory for sure, but I'm willing to keep an open mind.
Me too.
So are we saying that what we learned in history class might be, well, manipulated?
That's definitely a possibility that these sources are exploring, and it raises some pretty big questions.
If the historical narrative, as we know it, is incomplete or potentially fabricated, what else might be hidden?
Right. What other narratives might need to be re-examined?
And where does this lead us?
Exactly, and that's something we're going to dive into a little bit deeper in the next part of our deep dive.
This is getting good.
I know, right? It's like we're peeling back the layers of history and finding some pretty interesting stuff underneath.
I can't wait to see what else we uncover.
Stay tuned, folks. This is just the beginning.
Before we get too deep into this whole technology release idea, which I know we're both curious about, there's one more example from the YouTube transcript that I think we should touch on.
Okay, lay it on me. Does it have to do with that whole founded thing we were talking about earlier?
It does, actually.
I'm still thinking about that one.
Yeah, it's a real head-scratcher.
It is.
So the transcript brings up Yeshiva University High School building in New York City.
Oh, yeah. I've seen pictures of that building.
It's a beautiful structure.
It is. All that ornate stonework and a massive auditorium.
Exactly. And get this. According to the official story, it was built in under 11 months back in 1928.
Hold on. Less than a year. For a building that size.
You heard that right. Less than a year.
I mean, even with today's technology, that seems like a stretch.
Right.
Let alone almost 100 years ago.
And like we were talking about before, the transcript points out that the school's history uses that word founded.
Right.
Which might suggest that the building's real origins are, well, let's just say, a little murky.
So are they saying that the builders just stumbled upon this massive, fully built high school? Like, oh, look what we found.
Well, the transcript doesn't explicitly say that, but it does raise some serious questions about the feasibility of building something so elaborate in less than a year, especially back then.
I mean, think about that courthouse we were talking about.
Right.
The AI analysis said that project would have taken years.
Years, at least.
And that was a much simpler building.
Absolutely. And when you apply that same logic to the Yeshiva University High School, well, that 11-month timeline starts to look even more ridiculous.
Yeah, it just doesn't add up.
It really doesn't.
The ornate stonework, the massive auditorium, those stained glass windows.
It's mind-boggling.
You're telling me they just whipped all that up in under a year.
And here's the thing.
What?
There's barely any information about how they actually did it.
Like, what about the workers?
Exactly. How many were there? What were their names? Where are the records? And the construction techniques, the blueprints, the building permits, where's all that documentation?
It's like they're intentionally leaving out all the juicy detail.
It's like they're trying to present this tidy little narrative that fits their timeline, but when you look closer, the whole thing falls apart.
So what are they implying? That the building was actually constructed much earlier, maybe by a different civilization altogether, and now they're just trying to, like, sweep it under the rug.
It's a possibility, and it all circles back to that technology release theory. If there's a group out there with access to, let's say, more advanced knowledge and tech than they're letting on, it would explain why we see these bursts of seemingly impossible progress throughout history.
So they're, like, holding back the good stuff and just doling it out as they see fit. But why? I mean, what would be the point of orchestrating such a massive long-term plan?
Well, the transcript suggests a couple of things. Control, for one.
Control, okay.
By controlling the flow of technology, they control society.
Right, right.
And then there's profit.
Of course, there's always profit.
New tech, new markets, new opportunities for the folks in the know.
I don't know, something about that just seems a little too, I don't know, conspiratorial for me.
It's definitely a big pill to swallow.
Yeah. Wouldn't there be pushback from scientists and inventors, people who are constantly trying to innovate and push boundaries? How could you possibly control that kind of drive and curiosity for centuries?
It's a valid point. And to be fair, the technology release theory is just one interpretation of the evidence presented in these sources.
Yeah.
But it does make you think, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
I mean, if we entertain the possibility that history, as we know it, might be incomplete or even manipulated, it raises some pretty fundamental questions.
It really does. It's like, what other parts of our history might be based on, well, a fabricated narrative?
And if we can't rely on the historical record as it stands, how does that affect our understanding of the world today?
Whoa.
It's a lot to process, right?
It is. We might need to take a minute to unpack all of this.
Yeah, let's take a breather and then dive back in.
All right. I think I've had a moment to digest all that. But before we get too lost in the weeds of all these theories and hypotheticals,
right,
let's bring it back down to earth for our listener.
Yeah, good idea.
Why should they care about all this? What's the relevance of questioning these historical narratives in their everyday life?
That's the big question, isn't it? I think it boils down to, cultivating a healthy sense of skepticism. A willingness to kind of look beyond the surface of things. If we accept even the possibility that some of these historical narratives might be incomplete or even intentionally misleading,
right,
it empowers us to question everything, to seek out different perspectives, to dig a little deeper, and ultimately to form our own conclusions.
So it's not just about uncovering some grand conspiracy or rewriting history.
No, not necessarily.
It's about developing a more critical approach to information in general.
Exactly. And that's crucial in today's world, right? We're bombarded with information from all sides.
Constantly.
So being able to evaluate sources, identify biases, and think for ourselves, that's more important now than ever.
It's like we were saying earlier about that word founded.
Oh, yeah.
Such a simple word.
Right.
But when you really stop and consider its implications,
it can really shift your perspective.
Totally.
Yeah.
And it highlights how language can be used to shape our understanding of, well, everything.
Absolutely. Those who control the narrative, they often use language very deliberately to influence how we see the world.
It's like that saying, often attributed to Mark Twain, it ain't what you don't know that gets you into trouble. It's what you know for sure that just ain't so.
That's a great quote, and I think it perfectly captures the essence of why exploring these alternative narratives is so valuable. Even if we don't agree with all the conclusions, just the process of questioning, researching, and evaluating different perspectives, it helps us become more critical thinkers.
It forces us to, confront our own biases and assumptions.
Yeah.
And consider the possibility that maybe we don't have all the answers.
Exactly. Which I know can be uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But it's also incredibly liberating.
Okay, I like that.
Because once you start questioning the accepted narrative,
yeah,
a whole new world of possibilities opens up.
So where do we go from here? What can our listener do if they're, interested in digging deeper into all of this?
Well, I think the first step is simply being aware of the potential for bias in any historical narrative. Don't just accept the official story as the only truth, Dig deeper. Research different perspectives and ask questions.
Be a history detective.
Exactly. Look for inconsistencies, missing information, alternative interpretations.
Pay attention to the language used. the sources cited.
And don't be afraid to challenge the accepted narrative.
Hmm.
Sometimes the most groundbreaking discoveries come from questioning what everyone else takes for granted.
Well, this has been a truly mind-bending deep dive.
It has.
And I feel like we've only just begun to scratch the surface of this topic.
Yeah, we've only just opened the door.
But hopefully we've given our listener some food for thought.
Some good questions to ponder.
And inspired them to, continue this exploration on their own.
Keep that curiosity alive.
So, to our listener, we leave you with this final thought. What if everything you thought you knew about history was just the beginning of the story?
I like that.
What other mysteries are out there waiting to be uncovered? The journey continues.